Hi, I'm Babakobi. Once again, if you have seen one of my podcasts, you will learn that I liked mathematics at school, but I also liked English. Maybe I understood it better than others, but I liked it too because it was a form of a language that I would use almost anywhere in the world. So, English is a language that you use or that you speak after learning it. And if it is not your mother's language, it is very difficult. And from my last video or my podcast, you learn that I remember at school, we were encouraged to speak English when I was in grade 6 and 7. That is the last two classes before going on to secondary. It was an encouragement to ensure that we learn to speak the English language properly. We get used to speaking English. So on the school premises, we were meant to speak English all the time. And I remember some of the students would not say a word for the whole day. Because if you spoke in any other language, the prefect would note your name down and you would be punished. And the school punishment was very, very tough. Sometimes you were meant to clean to water the garden, clearing in the garden, the weeds around the school, or watering the garden, flowers and vegetables, or the waste. There were black toilets. No one wanted to do that because those toilets were always bad. So if you said a word in any other language besides English, you would get into trouble with the teachers. So that is how we learned English. We learned how to speak English. So English is a language that everybody expects to use when communicating with other people besides their own language. If they go abroad or in some social places or informal places like offices and functions, major functions, meetings, you would have to use English so that most of the people in the group would understand what you're talking about. So English is a language that has been used now commonly by people to communicate to various people of different tribes or nationalities, because they are expected to have some English knowledge or to speak a bit of English. That is the minimum that you need to have to be able to speak English so that you can communicate with almost anyone. When traveling around the world, most people speak English. Americans speak English, Australians speak English, apart from the UK. Canadians speak English. There are other countries, of course, but if you're like the Chinese, they don't speak English. But if you speak English, you can go there and teach some of them English. It's an opportunity for those who speak English to teach English. However, I noticed that some people make mistakes when speaking English. Some of the mistakes are very embarrassing. If they were mentioned, whoever is concerned would be very embarrassed, because if you are someone in a position of power or in a position of authority, you are expected to speak proper English and speak and write it properly, correctly, with all the punctuations. But this is not the case in some cases. Some people managers or assistant managers or team leaders, but they still cannot speak English properly or write it properly. I remember at school we used to have an English reader. An English reader was mostly all about England. So I knew about England before I even got here to England. I knew about, I did not know it physically, but theoretically, I knew a lot of things about the British culture. That you speak English, you have breakfast in the morning, and you have lunch, and then dinner in the evening, and the school children have to go to school without exception. If you are found to have any child who is not going to school, you're in trouble. And that businesses started at 9. I knew all that. But it was all from the English reader, the book that I read in school. And from the book, I also learned that to learn the meaning of words, you have to learn how to use the words in a sentence. And to do that, every chapter had a list of words that you're going to learn the meaning or to use in sentences in that chapter. So when you go to a certain chapter, there will be a list of words at the top of the, just below the title. And those will be the words that you're going to learn about in that chapter. When we were in grade 6 and 7, we had an English teacher over the radio in Zimbabwe. That was Rhodesia then. And there was an English teacher teaching English over the radio. So there was a school radio, a small little champion radio. Most people from Zimbabwe would remember that there was those little radios called Champion, Supersonic Champion. That was one of the first radios that I also bought in my family because my family had never had a radio. So I was the first person to own a radio. So when I started working, that was the first radio that I bought because it was affordable for me, and I needed a radio because no one had ever had a radio in my family. So that was the first acquisition that I thought was more important to me. And it was important because, of course, on radio, you could hear a lot. You would listen to music, stories. And in Rhodesia, there was an African service of the Broadcasting Corporation and the European service. So if you went to European service, you would listen to English language news and English music. If you went to the African service, there were certain programs in different languages, in Shona and Ndebele mostly. Those are the two major vernacular languages in Zimbabwe. So most people could listen to that. And it was common that the young ones from school and having practiced speaking English, we were competing, trying to speak English when we are together. Even at home, if we meet with friends, school friends, we would try to speak English on our own, and that kept us up to date with a few words. And some of us even had the duty to study the dictionary, just learning the meanings of words in a dictionary, reading a dictionary almost every day to learn the words so that you don't come up with words that you don't understand. If they are brought up or someone says a word, you have to know what it means. And at the end, I'll tell you some of the long words that we used to say to each other to feel that we can speak better English. We always thought that having some long, complicated words would mean that you know better English. I'll come to that later, and we'll listen to that. So, in Rhodesia, the teacher that was over the radio, the little champion radio that I mentioned, the teacher was an English person, but he spoke more clearly and slowly so that we could understand what they were saying. Because English spoken by a non-English person and English spoken by an English person is different. An English person would not understand my accent, and I would not understand their accent. That is an issue in some cases. I would be saying something and they don't understand, and they will be saying something and I don't understand. It will take time for me or them to understand what we are trying to say. So, unless someone who knows better comes along and helps between the two of us, we would end up asking questions. Are you saying this, or do you mean that, or that? So, just because of the accent, someone cannot understand some of the English I'm speaking now. I suppose this is clear enough for anyone to understand, but in some cases you find that there are people who don't understand what I'm saying. So it is difficult for people who have not had an African speaking English, and for them to speak in English to them. In Zimbabwe or Rhodesia, there's a Fanagalo language that used to be would be spoken by people on the mines, but this was used by people at work, because people at work were from different countries and tribes. So for them to understand each other, they used a language called Fanagalo. Fanagalo was a language that is used, and is still used in some places, in some mines now, but most young people now have been educated. They can speak English, or they speak their own language mostly. But Fanagalo made it easier for people to understand each other. White people and black people of different language tribes would understand each other, because if they called a hammer sandu or spaniel for a spanner, each one would understand what the other one is saying. So those are some of the problems or issues that people faced during the early days. But during our time, when we came from school and joined the workforce in the mines, we spoke English with the white people at work, and we were also able to do the writing and speaking English. So it was easier for them to communicate with us, and sometimes we would be interpreters trying to explain what someone is trying to say, or explaining what someone implies or has said, so that the other side would understand, vice versa. That means to the English person or white person, or to the black person or another black person, because like people from Malawi, they still worked in mines, and the people from Mozambique, also Zambia, and those are mostly the people who used to work in mines. People from Mozambique, Malawi, and Zambia, and some from as far as Kenya and Tanzania. Those are the people who used to work in mines. In Rhodesia, Rhodesian local people, like the Shonas and the Bellas, they did not like working underground in the mines. They would do some office jobs or other surface jobs, but not on the mines, not in the mine, underground. They did not like going underground. But the people from Malawi, Zambia, and Mozambique, Tanzania, and Kenya, they would work on the mines very simply or easily. So, but the Zimbabweans became aware of that now. Almost every Zimbabwean can work underground in the mines, although some have now taken mining as a job for almost everyone. They're exposing themselves to danger, because mining can be very dangerous. It needs a lot of practical training so that you understand what is the requirements to work safely under extreme conditions in a confined area where you need ventilation and the light to see, because it's dark underground. So you see, it is quite a process working underground. So the English language is an official language that is used in offices and around with some other people, connecting with other people. But the people have got their own slang, or what we call slang, yes, slang languages or colloquial language, which is informal language. People can speak formally or informally. Formal, that's when they try to speak properly in an official way. Like in English, there's a formal way of saying things in offices. The office language is different from home language. When you're home, you can speak carelessly, but at work, you have to be careful what you say, because it has to mean what you say. And the policy, work policy, will demand that you speak in a formal language. So English has got a way to train or to make you say things formally. But there are certain things that you cannot say formally when you're away. So as young people growing in a mining community, we were watching films like, we used to call them cinema, and bioscope, we call them bioscope. And the most common actors were cowboys. Cowboys were very popular. Some called them Jackie. Any cowboy, they call Jackie. I don't know why they call them Jackie. I don't know if it is from jockey, because there are many words that have been distorted in English. I don't know. I suspect that instead of saying jockey, someone who rides a horse, they call Jackie, meaning a horse rider. But it was a common for a cowboy. And the cowboy heroes were mostly like John Wayne, Roy Rogers, John McBrown. John McBrown and Roy Rogers were the most commonly known cowboys. And if there was a film which was used to be shown on Sundays, Sunday evening, because it had to be on a dark area, and there was a screen built outside for people to see. And the film would be screened onto the screen, and the people would watch it from the screen, which is just a wall built away from the distance, and with a space in between for the people to watch. And that is where, if you heard my last video, that I had a mathematical problem that I solved from after watching a film. So you see, some things lead to other things. Anyway, English is one subject that I have gone through, and I believe I can write a few sentences or say a few sentences correctly. And apart from the accent, which I cannot help, it is difficult for some to understand me, and sometimes it's also difficult for me to understand them. But I do try. Even in writing, it's even better if I write it down, because I can spell most of English words that I learned. I can spell them very well, and I can write a complete sentence. I can construct a sentence. I can construct a sentence. A sentence is constructed, putting words after another. That means use of verbs, phrases, clauses, and so on. Words used in a sentence, if it is trying to explain something that happened in the past tense and the present tense, and what we taught as past participle, something that is just gone through, like I had a cup of tea, But yesterday, I had a cup of tea yesterday, but I might have had another cup of tea now, it meaning that a short while ago, I had a cup of tea. But yesterday, I also had a cup of tea in the morning, maybe another in the afternoon. So I should be able to explain to someone, and they understand what I'm trying to say, and they can understand me if I say it properly. And the main trick we were taught was to try and speak slowly, so that someone would understand what we're saying. If you try to speak quickly, you distort some of the pronunciations, and people would not understand what you're trying to say. Speaking slowly, someone can pick what you're trying to say, and they understand what you mean. So English is one language that I learned, and it has helped me to come over to England and use and work using the language. So I think it has been a pleasant experience learning English and making use of it. But when I came to London, I also learned that when they say languages, they mean English, Spanish, Italian, or Portuguese. There's none of languages from, say, Africa. It's only languages from the European countries, European countries, because we cannot say from, because European countries are the countries that have spread their languages by colonialism. Most European countries, almost all European countries, have colonized countries in Africa, in South America, and America, but except for the USA, it was most British people who were speaking English. That is why English is spoken there, although it is now slightly different from British English. American English is slightly different from British English. And when an American is speaking, I can tell from the accent that this is American and this is British. So the language is very important. This is what I was saying, that the mother has to teach their children her language. But Africans have migrated to English. Most young mothers, who in Zimbabwe we call Salala moms, they're called Salala moms because they are a generation that was brought up in an English way. So Salala is a word from salads. Salads is an English meal or food. So anyone who has got a tendency to rely on English terms is termed to be a Salala. So it became a word that was used in Zimbabwe. It still is being used in some cases. If somebody say this one is a Salala, that means, or somebody is a salad. Sometimes they usually say it's salad, but in most cases it's Salala. It's a person who tends to be on the English side than their own side or their own tribe. So, and that has prevented many children from learning their own mother language because the mothers speak to them in English. And yet I've seen some Indians here going to the same school with the Africans, but the Africans tend to stick to English more than the other people, like Indians who speak their own language, their mother language. They only speak English at school. Children can speak a variety of languages at an early age. I began to speak Ndebele when I moved to Matabeleland from Mashonaland. When I was in Mashonaland, I was speaking Shona and Chewa, or Nyanja, which was called Nyanja then. Some people call it Nyanja, they still call it Nyanja, but the official name is Chewa. So we spoke, my mother's language is Shona, so I spoke Shona, and my father's language is Chewa, and I spoke Chewa. So when we're playing in our groups in the mines, many people of different tribes used to live together and they speak their languages. So the main languages were Shona and Ndebele, so and Chewa. So I spoke all those languages, but the Ndebele one I only learned that when I moved to Gwanda and I went to a Ndebele speaking school, the Sabiwa school in Gwanda. And the school served two mines, Vubachigwe and Blanket Mine. So children from Blanket Mine and Vubachigwe went to Sabiwa school. At first, when we got there, it was only up to standard 3, which is grade 5. And then it progressed as children from the mines. The two mines were actually improving the standards at the schools. There were some old blocks, I don't know who built them, but the mines, like Blanket Mine and the Vubachigwe, they actually built some blocks of classrooms to cater for extension or for the expansion of the school to allow a standard 4, 5, and 6 from standard 3. And when that happens, it so happened to be a school that had expanded more than other schools in rural areas, like the nearest was Gwakwe that I know of. Gwakwe, it was a few kilometers from Blanket Mine, and some children from Gwakwe had to come to Sabiwa. So they were walking quite a distance more than us, because from Blanket Mine to Sabiwa, it's about what? I'd say about 4 or 5 kilometers. But then we had some from as far as Bar 20. Bar 20 was somewhere almost halfway to Gwanda from Blanket Mine. So it was almost about 8 kilometers, because Blanket Mine to Gwanda is 16 kilometers. So that distance, children walking every day from school, from Bar 20, 8 kilometers to and from school. But I had experienced that as well when I had my standard 1 at Chiwosho School in Chirumanzu. I went to a school called Chiwosho, and from Chijaka village, I was walking, it's almost 10 kilometers every day to and from school. Me and my cousins, the other one is late. So I was the youngest, and I was in standard 1, and the next cousin was in standard 2, and the eldest was in standard 3. That is the year that I was at Chiwosho School. I started school in 1963. Started sub A or grade 1, and then 1964 was sub B or grade 2. Then grade 3, that is standard 1, the mine school Conmara Mine School closed down. The mine had closed down, and the people had migrated to Blanket Mine in Gwanda. So our families were some of the few that were the last to move from the mine to be transferred to Blanket Mine. So during that process, I still had no school. So for standard 1, I had to go to Giant Mine School. Giant Mine School near Gadzima in the Chegutu now. Giant Mine was in the Chegutu area. It was Hartley then. It was called Hartley. And I went to that school there, and then for 2 terms, and then Giant Mine also closed down, because it was a sister company to the Conmara Mine. So the employees there also transferred to Blanket Mine. So my aunt, who I used to stay with, moved to Blanket Mine. So my parents had to withdraw me from the Giant Mine School and take me to my other aunt in the village in Chirumanzu, where I went to Chiwosho School. That is, and it did my grade, that is standard 1, which is grade 3. So grade 3, that is standard 1. And that was in 1964, 65. Yeah, 65. So 65 when I was in grade 3. That was the most difficult year because I went to 2 different schools in the same year. I had Giant Mine School, which was the most convenient school. It was close to my aunt's house in the compound. It was the closest school I have ever gone to, because I could go with my cousin sisters to school, just a short distance. It was within the compound. Very convenient. And any break, even a 30 minutes break, we could come home and eat and still go back to school and get in class in time. So it was so close. I liked that one. That was the nearest school that I ever went to. Then from there I went to Chiwosho School. It was, like I said, almost 16 kilometers, between 10 to 16 kilometers, I'm not sure. But that is when I remember we were going to school in the morning after having plowed in the fields, plowing with the cattle. And then you still have to tie it up, get your bag, and go to school. In the morning we would go together, like I say, with my other 2 cousins. And the other cousin was late. And so we went to school. Because they were in the higher classes, when I was coming back to school, they would remain at school because the standard 2 and 3, they finished later than standard 1. Standard 1, we finished earlier. And I would walk with some of the children going back to our villages. And most of the villages nearer the school, the children would just get less and less as they reach their homes. And I was the only one remaining to go further up to Chijaka on my own, because the others will have reached their homes already. So we would separate there, and I would cross. It was the 2 rivulets going to Chijaka village. This is where we used to have a stick, a toothbrush. If you check one of my videos, you'll see me brushing my teeth with a stick toothbrush. That was what we used, because we never had a toothbrush. So we used a stick toothbrush to brush your teeth. Break a branch, cut it into a stick, chew one end, and make it a brush, and then clean your teeth. That is how I did it. And then on the last term, we had to move to, my parents took me back when they were moving to Gwanda. So that I was withdrawn from that school again to go to Gwanda. And in Gwanda, I went to standard 2. I remember my first teacher there was Mr. Ngube. Mr. Ngube was a pipe smoker. He used to smoke a pipe. So he was the first teacher that I met in the Ndebele community. And he's the first teacher to teach me Ndebele. And with the other children speaking, it didn't take me long to adapt to the situation and learn a few words here and there until I got to master it. And by the time I got to grade 7, I could speak Ndebele just like any other Ndebele child and write it as well. And I'd mastered it. I was even writing it better than some of the Ndebele children. So I could write a story in Ndebele because we had essays. We learning to write essays when in grade 7. I could write an essay in Ndebele, a letter in Ndebele. Our primary schools used to teach us how to write letters, and we wrote letters both in vernacular, which is the indigenous languages, and in English. So we were taught how to write a letter. And we had a subject, amongst the subjects, there was a subject of writing, to practice writing. As we got older, we were moving from the printing to cursive writing so that you would write a bit faster. So for now, today, I stop it there. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. And please, if you like my story, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm Baba Kobi. Thank you for watching.